Do you think we attract things to us? In the thoughts of manifesting and the law of attraction. Now, do you think we attract the bad things to us as well? Well, let's have a look at Carole Lombard and TWA's Flight 3. Now, Carole Lombard was a big star back in the 1930s, and she traveled on Flight 3 back in 1942. There was only one person that we know that actually felt something wrong with that flight. But for everybody on board, do you think they were attracting something bad? Well, let's have a look. And welcome back to the Bric-a-Brac shop. And this is the portal to the paranormal, the spiritual, and the unexplained. And I'm Tom from the shop. So welcome. Now, do you think we attract things to us? Now, there is a train of thought, the law of attraction, the secret, that we are always manifesting. We put out what is in our subconscious, what is in our minds. And that is the good things. I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow, all those sort of things. But what about the negative things? So-and-so is going to leave me. They are having an affair. Now, we don't actually put that out there, but sometimes they linger in the back of your mind, and it seeps into the subconscious, I believe, and that starts to play out. Because when you think about it, why some people are attracted to different catastrophes and other people are repelled from them, like the Twin Towers in 9/11, how some people just happen to be late for work, how some people didn't want to go to work, and some people had subconsciously arranged other appointments, like a dental appointment in the morning, so they couldn't go to work. What do you think about that? And this is what brings me to TWA Flight 3 and Carole Lombard. Now, for those of you who don't know, Carole Lombard was a big film star in the 1930s. She was the star of such films like My Man Godfrey, Nothing Sacred, and To Be or Not to Be, which happened to be her last film. In fact, she was earning so much money, they say she was earning more money than her husband, who was Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood at the time. Now, for those of you who don't know them, they were like like a few years ago, the Brad Pitt and the Angela Jolie of the film world in today's time. That's how big they were. They were like royalty. And in 1941, as we know, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbour and the USA entered World War II. So there was a drive to raise money for the war effort. So Carole Lombard went on a war bond rally, selling war bonds, and that was to raise money for the military, for the country, to fight against the enemy. And this was in January 1942. She went on a 3-day tour, you could say, promoting war bonds. And she actually raised $2 million, which back in 1942 was a hell of a lot of money. Now, this is where things start to get a bit bizarre. Now, back in those days, the main form of travel for long distance travel on land was train. And of course, you had to have money to fly. And flying wasn't the luxury journey it is today. But we'll get to that shortly. Now, on this tour, she was also accompanied by her mother, Elizabeth Parker, and Clark Gable was also supposed to have gone on this tour as well. However, due to other filming engagements, he couldn't go. So, in his place, Otto Winkler, the MGM studio publicist, and also a friend of theirs as well, accompanied them on their trip. So it was the three of them. Now, she stopped off at Salt Lake City and started her promotional tour there, and she went across the country to Indianapolis. In fact, she was actually supposed to spend a few more days promoting, but for some reason, the tour got cut short. We're not actually quite sure whether it was her who cut the tour short or the tour just got cut short. Now, on the last day in Indianapolis, after she'd actually finished, she said she'd do another appearance. And this was at the Cadle Tabernacle. And so in the evening, she had the last promotion there. And she was all dressed up in a black evening gown, long black gloves, and jewels as well. And of course, it finished and late in the night. And they were supposed to have a train trip back to Los Angeles. However, Carole Lombard was in a strange hurry to get back to LA, and so they decided to fly. Now, Carole Lombard's mother, Elizabeth Parker, she was a numerologist, and for some reason, she had a bad feeling about Flight 3. She didn't like the number 3, and there was too many of them. There was 3 in their party, her, Carole Lombard, and Otto Winkler. It was flight number 3, and also the aircraft was a DC-3. So she didn't like number 3 appearing so often, and she just had a bad feeling about it. And she said she'd rather go by train. However, in the end, Carole Lombard said, let's toss a coin. And so they tossed a coin, heads being the train and tails being the plane. And of course, tails came up. So they caught the plane. Now, do you think people attract things to them, whether they know it or not? What was on Carole Lombard's mind when she wanted to get back to LA really, really quickly? What do you think? Now, don't forget, if you enjoy this episode, like it, tell your friends, and click the like button down below and subscribe, and click the bell and the notification button as well, so you won't miss out. And if you stay to the end, I have an announcement on manifesting coming up. Now, do you think we attract things to ourselves, whether we know it or not, whether it's good or not? Because I'm beginning to wonder if this is what happened with Flight 3 and all the passengers on board. What do you think? Now, Carole Lombard was on a war bond promoting tour. It was the America's entrance into the war. So the whole country had gone on to military alert. So it was all this thoughts of war, death, destruction maybe. And although you could be saying it could be for victory because she was promoting the war bonds. But you never know what else, because when someone says they're going to war, you naturally think of bombings and gunshots and destruction. So what do you think might have been going on in their mind? Now, there's a rumor that Carole Lombard wanted to get back to Los Angeles because Clark Gable was making a film with Lana Turner. Now, she was the blonde bombshell, you could say, of Hollywood at the time. And she was another big star. And she was famous for such films like The Ziegfeld Girl, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the postman always rings twice, an imitation of life. And so Carole Lombard, you could say, didn't trust Clark Gable with her. Now, it could have been just a rumor because you hear how close Clark Gable and Carole Lombard were and how much in love they were. But in a biography of Clark Gable, they were actually saying that he was told that Carole Lombard was on her way back and they were going to play a trick on her. So they got a blonde wax mannequin and they thought that put it in the bed. So when Carole would come home, she would think there was a blonde woman in the bed. And so they planted that. And of course, things didn't work out that way. So it makes it wonder why she really wanted to get back to Los Angeles and Clark Gable. Stories say that they were legitimately very much in love with each other, and so she just wanted to get back to him, which is probably the case because Clark Gable was really distraught for quite a few years after the incident. So they decided they'd fly back. So Otto Winkler managed to find a flight to take them back to Los Angeles. Now, you got to think back, this is 1942. Most of the travel around the country was by train. And train back then took quite a few days, especially to get across such a big country at the time. Mind you, flying was not the way it is today. You would think Indianapolis to Los Angeles, how long would that take? Maybe 3 hours, 2 hours. However, back in 1942, looking at the timetables, it would have taken about 12 hours with quite a few stops. So Otto Winkler found a TWA flight. Back then, it actually stood for Transcontinental and Western Airlines, not the Trans World Airlines that we knew of today. And they had a DC-3, which was one of the most popular planes at the time. And most flights back then, for the common person, was really quite expensive. And most of these flights were cargo flights and taking mail across the country. And so there was quite a few different stops along the way. Now, Flight 3 originated from New York and went across the country to LA. And this flight actually started at 11 o'clock at night from New York, stopping at Newark, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Dayton, and arriving in Indianapolis. Now, don't forget, Carole Lombard wanted to get home. And so all they did was went back to the hotel and stayed there for a few hours. And she was still in her evening gown when she got on the plane. She didn't bother to get changed. She got on how she was dressed. Now, the plane was late, and so it actually left at 5:23 in the morning. And it wasn't a direct flight. So it also stopped at St. Louis, Kansas City, Wichita, Amarillo, and then Albuquerque in New Mexico. Now, this is when things begin to change. There's been a change of crew. The pilot, the co-pilot, the air hostess. And they got everyone off the plane because they needed to get military personnel back to Los Angeles. So they kicked everybody off the plane, including Carole Lombard, her mother, and Otto Winkler. Now, they said that they had to get the military back because it was utmost importance. However, Carole Lombard, still in a hurry to get back, insisted she'd be put back on the plane because they had also been doing military work, raising money for the war effort by selling the war bonds. So they decided to put Carole Lombard and her party back onto the flight. In fact, there was only one other civilian who flew on that flight, and that was one of the wives of a military personnel. She was going to meet him in Los Angeles. And so the plane took off. In fact, they even kicked off a concert violinist who was also on that flight. And so the flight took off just after 7 o'clock. Now, they were supposed to fly from Albuquerque direct to Los Angeles, flying into Burbank. But due to the cargo and their weight, they needed fueling. So they planned to stop in Boulder City. However, by the time they were to arrive in Boulder City, it was dark, and it was an airport that still didn't have any lit runways. So it'd be completely dark. And so they were diverted to Las Vegas Airport, which is now Nellis Air Force Base. And so by the time they took off, it was just after 7 o'clock, quite dark. And they don't really know what actually happened. According to the Civil Aeronautics Board, they say that it was pilot error. They took off and they were at their cruising altitude of 8,000 feet. And the plane slammed into Mount Potosi. It went up in a ball of flames and everyone was killed instantly. It was really hard to get to as well at the time. And Clark Gable, the studio, actually flew him to Vegas, where he waited for the rescue party to go up the mountain. He wanted to go up the mountain, but they advised him not to because they couldn't actually get vehicles up there. They had to use horses to bring the bodies back and salvage what they could. There was only one person that we know of that actually felt something wrong with that flight. And when you look at fate, they were actually taken off the plane in Albuquerque. But Carole Lombard insisted that they get back on. And quite interestingly, there was 21 seats on board, no number 13, so there was categorized as 22 seats. But there was 2 empty seats available. Now, why didn't any of the other passengers that were taken off, how come they didn't get back on board? Like the concert violinist who was taken off. Maybe it wasn't their time. Maybe they had a different energy going on. Because the whole plane were, apart from the 4 civilians and the crew, had military personnel on it. And maybe they had the thoughts of death or escape, or who knows. Which is why fate got them together and got them on that particular flight. Because they do say we attract what we think about, even if it's in the subconscious. So what do you think? Write your comments below and let me know what you think. It'll be interesting to see. In fact, I have a manifestation challenge starting on the 21st of June 2021. Just in case you watch this later on. And it's a 5-day experimental manifestation challenge to see what we can manifest or achieve, to delve into. So why don't you join me? I'll put the link below and join me on this manifestation challenge and see where we go and what we can find out. So do that if you're interested in manifestations or just want to check out and see what it's all about. And if you've enjoyed this episode, found it interesting, tell your friends, share it. Click the like button, please. It will help the channel and help us grow. And also subscribe. Press the bell and the notification button so you won't miss out on my episodes. Because when you press the notification bell, YouTube lets you know definitely lets you know when I release a new episode. So, what do you think about manifestations? Do we attract the bad things as well? Which is why we have to get into the subconscious to make sure we are programmed to attract the good things. Well, that's my thought. I'd like to see your comments, so write them below. And if you've enjoyed this also, you can buy me a drink. And the link is below as well. Any contribution is greatly appreciated because you will help the channel and help me as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay well and happy.